In the dimly lit halls of Parliament Hill, the weight of history seems to press down with each passing day, as Prime Minister Mark Carney navigates what many are calling the most challenging period in Canada-United States relations since the North American Free Trade Agreement was first conceived decades ago. The clock ticks relentlessly toward an August deadline that could reshape the economic landscape of North America, and with it, the lives of millions of Canadians who depend on the seamless flow of goods and services across the world's longest undefended border. The genesis of this crisis can be traced back to the resurgence of protectionist policies under the current United States administration, which has adopted a more aggressive stance on trade negotiations than Canada has seen in generations. Prime Minister Mark Carney has stated that 85% of the trade between Canada and the United States is tariff-free. Yet this statistic masks a more complex reality, where the remaining 15% represents billions of dollars in economic activity and thousands of jobs hanging in the balance. As negotiations enter what Prime Minister Carney has described as an intense phase, the stakes could not be higher for Canada's economic future. The steel industry, once the backbone of cities like Hamilton and Sault Sainte Marie, now faces uncertainty as tariffs threaten to price Canadian products out of American markets. These are not merely numbers on a spreadsheet, but represent the livelihoods of steelworkers who have spent decades perfecting their craft, communities built around these industries, and families whose futures depend on the continued viability of Canadian manufacturing. The automotive sector, which employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians across Ontario and beyond, finds itself caught in a particularly precarious position. Assembly lines that have hummed with activity for generations now operate under the shadow of potential tariffs that could make Canadian-assembled vehicles less competitive in the crucial American market. This industry represents more than just manufacturing. It embodies the deep integration of North American supply chains, where components cross borders multiple times before becoming finished products. Energy, perhaps the most politically sensitive sector of all, has become a focal point of these trade tensions. Canada's vast oil reserves, hydroelectric capacity, and emerging renewable energy infrastructure have long been viewed as strategic assets, not just for Canada, but for North American energy security. The prospect of energy-related tariffs raises questions that extend far beyond economics, touching on matters of continental security and the interdependence that has characterized Canada-United States relations for decades. Prime Minister Carney's approach to these negotiations has been characterized by what observers describe as cautious optimism, a delicate balance between defending Canadian interests and maintaining the diplomatic relationships that have served both nations well throughout their shared history. He has shown no signs of retaliating against increased tariffs, and has even suggested he is open to removing existing tariffs, if it would help Canadian industries, demonstrating a pragmatic approach that prioritizes economic outcomes over political posturing. The human cost of these trade tensions extends far beyond the boardrooms and negotiating tables where deals are struck. In small towns across Canada, from the lumber mills of British Columbia to the agricultural communities of the prairie provinces, families are grappling with uncertainty about their economic futures. These are communities where multiple generations have worked in the same industries, where local economies are built around single sectors, and where the ripple effects of trade policy changes can transform entire ways of life. Expert analysis suggests that the current trade environment represents a fundamental shift from the relatively stable low-tariff regime that has characterized North American trade for the past 3 decades. Trade economists warn that returning to pre-2016 tariff levels may be increasingly unlikely, as both countries grapple with domestic political pressures that favor protecting local industries over promoting free trade. This reality forces Canadian policymakers to confront the possibility that they may need to develop new strategies for economic growth that are less dependent on unfettered access to American markets. The lumber industry, a cornerstone of Canada's resource economy, exemplifies the broader challenges facing Canadian exporters. Softwood lumber disputes have been a recurring theme in Canada-United States relations for decades. But the current tensions have added new layers of complexity to an already contentious issue. British Columbia's forestry communities, many of which are still recovering from recent wildfire damage and the mountain pine beetle epidemic, now face the additional burden of navigating an increasingly hostile trade environment. Agricultural sectors across Canada are also feeling the strain of these evolving trade relationships, from the wheat fields of Saskatchewan to the apple orchards of the Annapolis Valley. Canadian farmers who have built their business models around access to American markets are now forced to consider alternative strategies. The interconnected nature of North American agriculture means that trade barriers in one sector can have cascading effects throughout the entire food system, affecting everything from commodity prices to food security. The technology sector, often viewed as the future of the Canadian economy, faces its own unique challenges in this new trade environment. Canadian tech companies that have relied on seamless cross-border collaboration with American partners now must navigate a more complex regulatory landscape. This is particularly significant for artificial intelligence, clean technology, and telecommunications companies that have been key drivers of economic growth in cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Financial markets have responded to these trade tensions with characteristic volatility, as investors struggle to price in the potential impacts of various negotiating scenarios. The Canadian dollar has experienced significant fluctuations, creating additional challenges for businesses that operate across borders. Currency instability affects not just large corporations, but also small businesses that import goods from the United States or sell services to American customers. As the negotiating deadline approaches, the international community watches with keen interest, recognizing that the outcome of these talks will have implications far beyond North America. Other trading partners are closely monitoring how Canada navigates this challenging period, as it may provide insights into how middle-power nations can maintain their economic sovereignty, while managing relationships with larger, more aggressive trading partners. The broader implications for global trade relationships cannot be understated. Canada's experience in these negotiations may serve as a template for how other nations approach trade disputes with major economic powers. The strategies employed, the concessions made, and the final outcomes achieved will be studied by trade negotiators around the world as they prepare for their own challenging discussions. Looking toward the future. Regardless of the immediate outcome of current negotiations, Canada faces the task of building a more resilient and diversified economy that can withstand the inevitable shocks of an increasingly unpredictable global trading system. This may require significant investments in new industries, the development of alternative trading relationships, and a fundamental rethinking of Canada's place in the global economy. The decisions made in the coming weeks will not only determine the immediate fate of specific industries, but will also shape Canada's economic trajectory for generations to come, making this one of the most consequential periods in the nation's modern history. As these critical negotiations continue to unfold, the story of Canada's trade relationship with the United States remains one of the most important narratives shaping our nation's future. From the steel mills of Ontario to the energy fields of Alberta, from the tech hubs of Vancouver to the agricultural heartlands of the prairies, every Canadian has a stake in how these discussions conclude. The ripple effects of trade policy extend far beyond government offices and corporate boardrooms, touching the lives of families, communities, and entire regions that depend on the economic stability that fair trade relationships provide. If you found this deep dive into Canada's evolving trade landscape insightful, we encourage you to share this video with friends, family, and colleagues who care about Canada's economic future. Your engagement helps us continue bringing you comprehensive analysis of the issues that matter most to Canadians, from coast to coast to coast. Do not forget to subscribe to West is Best for more in-depth coverage of Canadian politics, economics, and the stories that shape our great nation. Together, we can stay informed about the decisions that will determine Canada's place in an increasingly complex global economy.